Tupac Assassination, the podcast, rips the curtain away from the 30-year-old investigation of the murder of legendary rap artist Tupac Shakur through the eyes of director of the Tupac Assassination movies and the recent docuseries on Tubi, Tupac Cover-Up, Richard R.J. Bond. Each week, he and co-host Jeffrey Wilson, along with other co-hosts, will explore some facet of how these incredible and beloved documentaries were made, the pain, the healing, and most importantly, the people who were unafraid of telling their truth about what they knew to make that truth public. Welcome to our podcast.
Hey everybody, we're back again. It's R.J. Bond, the producer and director of the Tupac Assassination series, along with the docuseries Tupac Cover-Up, which is currently playing on Tubi. You need to go check it out because it's free and you've got no excuse not to. With me, as always, is Arnie Villarreal. Greetings.
Hey, ¿cómo estás, people?
And Jeff Wilson, greetings to you, my friend.
What's up? How's everybody doing?
Good, good. We are doing well. We are sailing along into another episode of Who Knows What, because we go into these things and it's kind of a jam session.
Can I stop you before you start? You had one of the last times we talked, you had recently gotten Tupac Cover-Up into the Latin American market, 93 million people. How's that playing out, sir?
Don't know yet. I mean, they just delivered it. We had some troubles with the Spanish subtitles, and that kind of thing is always a shit show. But it's been delivered, and I will know. It takes a good 3 to 4 months before it happens to know what's going on with it.
Okay.
Reporting takes that long. It's not. I think in this age of computers, I think everybody knows it, but they don't want to tell you. So because if they tell you, that means they got to pay you. And that's always it, wasn't it? At the end of the day,
you hold their feet to the fire, man.
I had a distributor flat out tell me. He says, "You know the drill. We'll hold your money as long as we can. You know,
ouch.
But we have to pay you. We'll give him points for honesty." So the last show we talked a little bit about my personal involvement in Keefe D's dilemmas these days. Keefe D being the accused killer of Tupac Shakur, the alleged killer of Tupac Shakur, who is sitting in a Clark County Detention Center jail waiting for trial that's supposed to happen in February of 2026. So if you're listening to this podcast and it's after February of 2026, you know that you're really late to the party. So that's for sure. So guys, I want to tell you a little bit more. Recently, Keefe D's attorney, Carl Arnold, his current attorney, has filed what's called a writ with the Supreme Court of the state of Nevada. Why the heck do you do that? Well, generally speaking, in most murder cases, you file what's called a writ of mandamus, which is a notice to the court that you're bringing up an area of legal interest. And in this particular case, and they do it with most capital murder cases, they do it as an automatic thing shortly after the charges are filed. What it is it's a question to the judge at the Supreme Court. It's kind of like a mini appeal where you're basically challenging that they have any evidence. And they could have a ton of evidence, but just by nature of the beast, the defense always files this. It's like just a form. They just always file the writ of mandamus and challenge the evidence, because if they don't and the case gets appealed later, they can't bring that up. They don't have the right to say, well, they didn't have sufficient evidence and the case should have been dismissed because they don't have enough evidence to even bring this case in front of the court, which is what Carl Arnold has said about Keefe D's case. He's saying that Keefe D said some stupid shit, but nobody has been able to corroborate anything that he said, any claim that he said. Nobody has been able to find a gun, a car, or anything that was involved with anything he said.
Place him in Vegas.
Yeah, nobody can even place him in Vegas. Okay, so they are challenging that there is insufficient evidence to bring this case to trial. And like I said, it happens every murder case. It happens that way, and it usually happens within days of filing a motion to have the case dismissed, because you got to give the local judge a first shot at it. You say to the local judge, hey, there's not enough evidence here. And she says, well, there is. And so the case moves forward. Well, then you appeal that to the Supreme Court. You say, no, we disagree. We think the judge is wrong about this. And the Supreme Court will either agree with the judge or they'll say, no, you're right. The judge didn't consider that. So there has to be a new hearing and a new trial. And we kick it back down to the district judge to make a decision on that. So that's what those are. Now, there's usually only one challenge to that because, like I said, it happens all the time. They put it up to the Supreme Court and the judge makes a decision on it. The only time that a writ like that can be really questioned, of course, they can obviously once that writ's filed, the prosecution's got a chance to make their own statements and argue the case as you would. But there's only one real technical grounds that you could have that case thrown out, the one to the Supreme Court. And it's called latches, which means that you didn't file it in time. What took you so long? Why now? And because of that, there's usually really tight timelines in cases, especially big cases. There's real tight timelines. So, for example, most murder cases, that writ is filed right after they indict the guy, right after the indictment, because it's an official challenge to the evidence. Right off the spot, say, wait a minute, we're not going to let this guy sit in jail a single day before we get up to the Supreme Court and challenge them and make them show us their evidence. And if there's not good evidence, and the Supreme Court says, no, there's not enough evidence here, then they send it down and they let the guy go, and your guy's in jail for 3 days. That's it. It's over. Some attorneys wait until after the motion for a new trial, which should our motion to dismiss the trial. You file a motion to dismiss, like, why are we even here? And then the judge says either, yes, I'm dismissing the trial, or no, we're going forward. Well, first off, Keefe D's been in jail for almost a year and a half, where I think we're going on around in 2 years now. In November, I think it'll be 2 years.
That long? It's already, geez.
Time flies, baby. Time flies.
2023. November 2023. He was
never lie.
So you have to ask the question about this writ, and if most attorneys, and I've heard it from other attorneys in Vegas, good attorneys, big name attorneys, that said that this writ should have been, that's the first thing you do is file that writ. Because if the Supreme Court doesn't think that they've got enough evidence to move forward on a trial, it doesn't matter what the trial judge says. It's done. It's over. And they have to come up with new evidence or recharge them or whatever, but that case stops dead in its tracks. So that's usually the first thing you do, because it's also kind of like pheasant hunting a bird dog, where you can actually now get the prosecution to spit up what all their evidence really is. Because they don't necessarily have to disclose that till way into trial when they're in discovery and they come up with their witness list and they come up with the evidence they're going to present at trial. All of that kind of happens over time. But if you file that writ, you say, I don't see any evidence. Then they have to talk about what their evidence is. So it gives you a good two things. Helps you maybe get your guy out faster. But even if they say no, everything's going to roll forward like it is, then the prosecution has still had to put up what evidence they're going to say exists. Because if your claim is there's no evidence, the only way they counter it is, yes, there is, and here it is. Okay. And it has to be more than what he said. The Nevada Supreme Court has been very clear. You cannot convict a man solely on his own self-incrimination. Can't do it. Okay. You have to have other evidence. You have to have something outside of it to prove what he says is true.
What could it be? What could their magic bullet be? Because that's all they have is his running his mouth.
Well, that's the interesting thing about it. I'm gonna let Arnie actually define each one of these because he's good at this. I'm gonna say it. You're gonna tell me what it means. Okay, I know what it means, but I'm gonna let Arnie talk about it. Okay, so there are three kinds of evidence that you can have at a trial. You can have direct evidence, you can have circumstantial evidence, and you can have hearsay evidence. So, Arnie, why don't you tell us what circumstantial evidence means?
Circumstantial evidence is, you have other witnesses. You have other evidence such as a paperwork, a flow of circumstantial. He was there at the place. He was there at the location. Why, he had reason to commit this crime. That's circumstantial.
Right.
Then you
No
have your
smoking
testimony.
gun.
No
Nobody saw
smoking
him do the
gun.
shooting, but they saw him at Target earlier that day, casing the
Right.
place out. Did he shoot anybody then? No, but he was there early. Okay, now with the Tupac case, they talk about David Mack and Rafael Perez, who were involved in the Biggie case, that they were at the Peterson Auto Museum the day
Allegedly,
before
allegedly,
for no
allegedly.
apparent reason, walking around checking the place out. They weren't on security detail. They had nothing to do with Biggie's security at all. And yet, these two cops that are known death row affiliates are casing the Peterson Auto Museum the day before there's supposed to be a big event there. Okay. That's a perfect example of circumstantial evidence. There's a circumstance that we're looking at that says, hey, may not be direct evidence. Nobody saw anybody with a gun shooting anybody, but those guys were there. And why were they there? And why were they casing the place?
Or
That's
the indirect circumstantial stuff of David Mack having never taken time off really, except for
right.
those 3 days for that Biggie thing, and I think
Yep.
3 days around Pac. Am I speaking out of turn on the Pac one? But I know he definitely took the 3 days off for the big one.
Well, there's circumstantial evidence, and sometimes that evidence is disallowable because of relevance. Like, so for example, they say, well,
Right.
David Mack, he wore a pair of black trousers on a Friday. Well, they go, well, what's that got to do with anything?
Right.
Well,
Right.
every other day he wore white trousers, and today he wore black ones. It just so happens somebody died that day. Maybe the black trousers was a sign that they could. So, and it gets crazy like that. But that's circumstantial. That's why direct evidence is your best bet. The smoking gun, fingerprints on the weapon, fingerprints on the glass, on the door, whatever it is, bloody handprints, things like that. That's direct evidence because you can tie
Yeah.
that to somebody's fingerprints. That's direct.
Hmm.
Circumstantial is what we learn about things as they happen. Like Arnie said, it can be witnesses who said, yeah, well, we saw him. He was kind of hanging out, around the crap tables, so we know he was there in Vegas but that's circumstantial. We don't know because,
Right.
He
um,
was prepping for a crime,
right.
basically. Yeah.
So, and then you have the third, which is hearsay evidence.
Mhm.
And Arnie, you want to take a shot at hearsay evidence?
Well, it's hey man, Jeff's friend, Omar was the one that said this,
Right.
and then you're telling the story for Omar instead of going direct to the source.
Yeah,
Uh,
especially if Omar's dead.
exactly. And you have, your testimonial. They're going to testify. Well,
Right.
yeah,
So yeah. So in the Tupac case, in the Keefe D case, great job, Arnie. The in the Keefe D, you make a good cop. Did I ever tell you that? You make a good cop. Uh,
I've been told that a few times,
yeah,
but lately,
yeah,
no, man.
yeah.
That's a whole nother episode. Go ahead.
So in the Keefe D case, you have this situation where you've got some gangbanger guy by the name of Dirt Rock or Dirthead, Blockhead, whatever his name is. He's testifying that a dead guy named Big Dre, who was supposed to allegedly been in the car with Orlando Anderson and Keith Davis when the shooting happened, that Big Dre told him everything there was to know about the shooting and where he was and how it went down, and that Keefe D was there. And but Big Dre's dead. There's no way you can corroborate it with him. This Dirt Rock guy says that he heard this guy tell him, firsthand testimony, heard him tell that. That's hearsay evidence. So when somebody says there's no evidence in the Tupac case, there is. But the kind of evidence that it is moves from very solid evidence to really shaky evidence. And it goes
Can I ask a quick
direct.
question,
Yeah.
RJ?
Yeah.
I've heard many YouTube videos about something about Orlando Anderson going to the hospital because he hurt his shoulder, dislocated his shoulder. Is there any medical records to show that he was at the hospital during this time might have happened, or later in the night, or any medical records of Las Vegas that he was there
You're
any
talking
point in
about any
time?
kind of documentation that would
Yeah,
prove
that's
that
what
he
I'm.
went to
Yes,
the
yes, sir.
hospital? Yeah, there is. In the Las Vegas police files, it mentions specifically that they contacted Sunrise Hospital for copies of Orlando Anderson's medical records. Okay.
Okay.
And they wouldn't be asking if he had the flu. Okay.
Right.
They-
Right.
They're 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 contacting and they're getting those medical records back from a Sunrise Hospital, and that's in
I'm
the
wondering if there's
police file.
a determination of timeline of like he checked in at. I mean, just
We don't
couldn't
have
place it.
that. There's been a lot of people that have tried to get those medical records
Right.
in terms of that. It's been so long, the records are probably destroyed, even if HIPAA didn't apply, which it
Yeah,
does.
that's
But
true.
even if it didn't
True.
apply, it's 30 years ago. So,
Right.
hospitals are usually only supposed to maintain their records
That's yeah.
10, 15 years
Whole
max.
facts. Whole
Maybe
facts.
and with birth records and stuff like that, maybe they do. And you know what? For all we know, they could. I don't know. But I don't have the right to ask for them. Vegas has apparently asked for them and received them, and they're not saying anything about it.
Wow.
And
Imagine
and
that.
yeah, but everybody, there's been several people that have talked about Orlando Anderson going to the hospital. Okay, so unless there's a record proving it, that's hearsay evidence. So in your strength of evidence, there's direct evidence, which there's none. There's circumstantial evidence, which there's a little, and then there's hearsay evidence, which there's a lot of. And the judge can make the decision. There's certain exceptions. Hearsay is generally not admissible in court, but there are a handful, and every state's different, but in Nevada, there's a handful of what they call exceptions to the hearsay rule that for one reason or another, this person might be, that hearsay might be admissible as evidence. Now, that doesn't mean that evidence is going to sway the jury. Okay. It just means that the jury can hear it, other than evidence that the jury can't hear. So in the case of the Big Dre stuff, there's a pretty good likelihood that the jury would probably hear that. They might hear what
Mm,
Dirt Rock has to say, because I think one of the exceptions is that the person that was attributed that statement to is no longer alive. Okay.
right.
It
Mm.
would be like if they interviewed one of the EMTs and says, "What was Tupac's last words?" And he went,
Fuck you.
yeah, yeah, no, it wasn't. You
I'm
just
sorry.
went,
F you. Or,
you know, or or what was Orlando Anderson's words?
Oh,
I
geez.
shot Tupac. There,
Yeah.
right.
okay.
That's a lie.
That's hearsay, okay, and it's bullshit. But that's the problem with hearsay is that there's no way to corroborate it. So that's why it's generally not admissible because there's no way anybody can make anything up. The person that's dead isn't there to hear, in there to verify it.
And not to
So
beat a dead horse, but that's why I would think that there would be some admissibility of the medical records of, hey, Orlando was here at the hospital
well,
at
that's
what.
admissibility for the defense. That's not the prosecution. And what we're talking about with this writ is they're saying that the prosecution has no evidence. They're not saying that there's no evidence at all about
Mm,
anything.
Okay.
It's the
Okay.
defense challenging the prosecution's evidence and telling the Supreme Court, why are we even here? What they have a little things what they could call evidence, but it's shitty. It's
very
bad.
shitty.
There's
Yeah.
this, it's shady as hell, and they would never win a case like this in a million years. So why are we even here? That none of this, even if the stuff they bring is probably not admissible.
Well, and
So
as you said, isn't it according to Nevada law, nobody could
yeah.
be considered guilty or, off just hearsay or what they
No,
stupid stuff they say.
they can't off of they can't self-incriminate, which means that they
Right.
can't tell on themselves. However, if they tell on themselves, and there's the guy who was allegedly sitting next to him, and he gets up on the stand and he says, "I was sitting next to him, and he was there." Well, he's right, he was there. Then yeah, that's pretty damning. Unfortunately, everybody in the car is dead,
Everyone's gone.
except for Keefe D.
Right.
So a guy by the name of appropriately named, I'm sure, Dirt Rock or Dirt Block, or I still can't get his name right, but I think it's Dirt Rock. That
Yeah. You're right.
he that he heard this other guy who doesn't have any credibility say this. It's probably not even admissible, okay, because of the credibility of the guy who said it and the credibility of the guy who is now bringing it forward to the court saying this guy told me this. But that's what this writ's all about. Now, the problem is I don't think this writ's going to get anywhere. And that's the sad part. I've seen time and time again, provably, where the prosecution has challenged the timeliness of Keefe D's attorney's filings because there are rules about how often you have to, um, how soon you have to respond to things after you've been given, like, 30 days to respond to a subpoena, et cetera, et cetera. And in this particular case, Mr. Arnold has been challenged by the prosecution several times on filing things too late, filing things out of time. And you got to do that right, because if they can blow you away on a technicality, you're pretty screwed.
Procedural stuff. Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. It's a procedural. Well said. Um, with and Carl Arnold filed. They argued that Carl Arnold had filed the motion to dismiss based on the juror misconduct that we talked about last episode. Go watch that one, or go see that, listen to that one. Um, that he filed his motion for a new trial based on juror misconduct too late. That he only had like 7 or 9 days to file it, and he filed it 13 days late. Well, the problem is that's
Oh,
because Carl Arnold's not paying attention to that. He's not paying attention. So he got together with me and a couple other people who we said, well, let's try to argue it this way. Let's change the argument to that the argument is that way. And that's what he argued. And we actually won on that one. But they've challenged him. The prosecution has challenged him constantly on the fact that he just doesn't wake the F up and get with it and get things done. He just kind of comes in and wings it when he walks in.
If I may ask you, and we recapped this, we talked about this before on another episode, but how did Carl Arnold get brought onto the team to defend Keefe?
Well, Keefe D had a public defender. Two of them actually had public defenders before he went with Carl Arnold. And I don't know what the motivation was for Keefe D to go with Carl Arnold. I know that Keefe D had a personality conflict with one of the two public defenders. Maybe he thinks the guy didn't like him or didn't believe him or whatever. My view on the public defenders that they had picked Kano and I forget the name of the other guy, McGuire, I think his name was. They were great. All the conversations I'd had with them, they knew the case. They understood what was going on with it. They kind of knew who Reggie Wright was. They knew what all that was about, and were ready to mount a vigorous defense. They weren't the kind like you hear, on TV about the public defender just rolls over and gives you a bad deal. Um, these guys were motivated to get it done. In fact, they were so motivated to get it done that they were willing to fly to my house in California from Vegas to go over any information that I had in all my research and all of my work that might help them with the case. They were scheduled to be on that flight. Keefe D canceled them 2 days before they were flying out here to meet with me. And then he went with this Carl Arnold. I don't know why he did. He just didn't like and didn't trust the public defenders. And that's something we're actually going to talk about and cover up season 2. We're actually going to talk about that. We're going to talk to several community leaders in that about why it is that they think inner city and underserved communities who have an institutional distrust think that the public defender is out to sell them out.
I mean, to the point where there is and has been, even when I was a kid, the public pretender or public defender.
Public pretender. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah.
accidentally slipped up.
Yeah. That was good.
No, I'm just saying that I just said it in the wrong order, but that's not a new thing. Like they're not necessarily working on your behalf. You just,
Well, it was interesting
I
because
always used to, say, the public defender in that court building would be your best bet, and for if you had no funds available to have any support.
Without a
Because
doubt.
they knew, they know the other prosecutors, they know the judges, they know the whole system that's happening there, and they're well known,
and they have resources.
They have resources.
Yes. Unlimited resources. They can write the same checks that the prosecutor can write to go talk to anybody or go fly anywhere, go do anything.
And you said that, RJ, in another episode. That's almost why part of the rationale. Like that's unlimited resources, whereas Keefe D's family doesn't necessarily have the resource to bring in another lawyer. But that makes sense. Because what was the other gentleman's name who originally defended Keefe?
Kano. Oh no, Goodman, Ross Goodman, or Kano. Kano was the public defender. Goodman was his first private attorney.
Oh, okay.
And Goodman wanted a whole lot of money to defend him. And, I like Ross. He's a good guy. I talked to him. He's a good dude. But he's just flies at a higher level that when you get him, you're paying $1 million for your defense.
That name doesn't sound familiar. There was another guy, some legal representative of Keefe or something back in the day. And maybe I'm just crossing the streams and don't know what I'm talking about. But
I don't know. Because Kano was the only other one. Kano was the public defender
Okay.
and that I dealt with. And it was a good dude. I mean, they were all really good dudes, and they seemed like they were really interested in his best interest. But for reasons unknown to me, he decided to go with Carl Arnold. So it is what it is.
And here we are.
The Yeah, and here we are. I think that the prosecution is going to make a vigorous complaint when they respond that he waited 6 months after the motion to dismiss the trial was over to file this writ. And the courts usually want them filed really fast because they say, you catch lightning in a bottle. If there's a problem, yo, I'll solve it. Check out my mic while the DJ revolves it, right?
Stop. Shut your
Wow.
mouth. He went vanilla ice
I don't
on
know
it.
where I had to just lapse into that all of a sudden, and my brain just
He went
Sign him
malfunctioned.
up.
Sorry about that, guys.
Vanilla RJ just took over.
Vanilla RJ. RJ's always vanilla. But no, if there's a problem with the case, they want to know right away. They want to get involved with it, get it done with. That's called judicial economy. So they're going to bang on the fact that he's waited 6 months. Arguably, he's waited a year and a half, almost 2 years, because that writ should have been filed. A couple of attorneys I know that are defense attorneys there told me flat out they would have filed that within days of him being indicted. That it's like he's already screwed that up because he's let that window go by for so long. So he had the motion to dismiss. That might the 6 months case laws run back and forth about that. Some courts have been fine with it. Some courts say that's too long.
Well, and
So
just
it's
prognosticating, looking forward, because the trial isn't until February. Say they dismiss or deny this writ. What's the kind of plan B, or how does this
no, they just move
cultivate?
forward. They just move on like it was like nothing happened. Nothing to see here, folks. Just keep moving.
It's not a game. I mean, it's not like a game.
No, it
ender,
doesn't
if you will.
prejudice. It doesn't prejudice him in any way. And in fact, the benefit of it is that you've made a record that you have challenged the evidence. And if they go through the trial, and by the end of the trial, and this kind of happened in the Karen Reed trial, a trial that happened recently about a woman who they accused of backing over her husband and running him over late at night after a party.
Oh, it's not the
And
Reggie Wright video. Oh, I'm sorry, it's
no,
something else. I'm sorry.
no,
Something else.
no,
Apologies.
running over with a
Across
van.
the stream
No,
there.
backing
Across the
over
stream. Apologies.
running him over with a van. But when you think that in both cases, you get to the end of the trial and the closing argument is they didn't show us any evidence. We went through this whole thing and they brought all these people up. At the end of the day, there was nothing admissible and they showed us nothing. And how much does that cost the taxpayers? How much time did that take? A year in court hearings and stuff, a 4 week, 5 week trial, and they at the end of the day they say they got evidence, but they show that they don't. That writ right there saves a lot of time because it fleshes out ahead of time whether or not they should even be going through all of this. Okay. So, but what it also does is that at time of appeal, if you bring it up and you say, hey, there's no evidence here. Okay. And the judge says, oh, yes, there is. And the Supreme Court says, oh, yes, there is. And then you go all the way through the trial and there hasn't been. Then you can actually say, okay, we wasted all this time. There was no evidence. So, it's something you can bring up on appeal. And if he gets convicted, he can go back and say, well, this evidence, we already said there wasn't legitimate evidence, and the court was wrong to consider this hearsay evidence to be admissible. It shouldn't have been. So, but you can't raise that defense unless you file that writ, because when you appeal a case, only the stuff that you introduce in the original case can be considered. It's not like you get a new trial. A lot of people think when you go and appeal a case that you get a new trial. It's not like that. They go back over everything that was done at the original trial and they look to see if there was any mistakes made. And if there were, they hand it back to the other one and say, you got to do a new trial. But they do not try the case when you file an appeal. A lot of people think it's like your second hearing. It's not. Like a redo. It's not. They just go back and look for mistakes that were made the first time. So if you don't call out the mistakes in the original trial, there's nothing for them to look at. So you lose that opportunity. And you never want to see that happen. And there's a lot of attorneys critical of Mr. Arnold that have told me that there are some problems with the case. So, I hope that he gets it. I hope they see his way. I hope that they do that. I just think if I had to place a bet about it, I think there's probably an 80% chance that's going to get kicked on a technicality. The Supreme Court is going to believe the prosecution is saying, you know what, yeah, maybe those facts would have been relevant a year and a half ago, but we're this far down the pipe and we're getting ready for trial in 6 months, and now you're bringing this
Mhm.
up? Really? Okay, sorry. You know,
Right.
the reality of this, and again, for all of you listening out there, I am not an attorney. I do not give legal advice. This is not to be construed as legal advice. This is my knucklehead opinion. When you have a case, you have what's called discovery, which means depositions, which means
Mm,
subpoenas, which means you call out for information, you get witnesses, you question the witnesses. If they're
yes.
not necessarily your witness, you can call them in a deposition and you can depose them. So you get their statement ahead of time, and then later at trial, you can challenge them on information you may have found that contradicts what they said in their deposition. Arnie, you've heard about this.
Yeah.
This is normal.
Absolutely.
This is just
Yeah.
normal stuff,
Happens all
right?
the time.
Yep, normal stuff. Mr. Arnold has done nothing
Wow.
almost 2 years into this case. And now he wasn't, again, can't blame him for everything because, again, I think he came into the case a year in, maybe year and a half in, after the public defenders were gone. But you see, at some point, you start issuing subpoenas. At some point, you start scheduling depositions, and they take months to schedule, just to get everybody on the same page, all the attorneys in the same room at a
So you're
certain
saying
date.
nothing has been done by this man?
Nope.
Wow.
I mean, he's had a private investigator looking at stuff allegedly, but there's been no subpoenas issued that I'm aware of.
Mm.
They can issue, and I'll put a caveat on that. They can issue them all day long. I wouldn't know about it because they don't file them with the court. So when you send a subpoena, they don't have to get the court's permission to do a subpoena. They can send a subpoena out, all day long. Okay.
Got it.
If depositions, other things like that, we know they haven't happened because they haven't happened. Okay. There's been no conversation, no talk, and certainly the Davises would have told me that there was depositions that were done, there were subpoenas that went
Right.
out. They talked to their attorney. I'm sure he would tell them what was going on. So I can say basically anecdotally, and by the way, this is now we're into that circumstantial evidence realm. I don't have any direct evidence that he hasn't sent any subpoenas or that he hasn't deposed anybody, but circumstantially, the Davises have said that he hasn't, and I see no other evidence that he has. So I lead to the
Mm.
conclusion that nothing has happened. I mean, this is the thing. He's filed a few motions here and there, motion for new trial and all that, but they're so spaced out in terms of months that go by
Yeah,
that
it's
this case should have been, in my opinion, this case should have been way further ahead. And by the way, I've made no bones about that. I've told Keefe D that. They recorded my call and played it for Carl Arnold, so he knows what my opinion is on all this. Okay, he knows what I had to say, and I stand by it
well,
because I
maybe they had to
watched.
slow it up a little bit to get him into a fight, to reduce any kind of bond, to get him back on the streets. I mean,
Right.
it seemed like there's maybe a slip between a cup and a lip is what they're doing right now. It's like a
Yeah.
multi-layered thing they got going on.
Well,
I'm a
that's
conspiracy guy, but it could be as
well, that's
simple as Keefe
and
did it.
again,
But
it's and I mean, I'll put it out there. I mean, I just it just my personal opinion of the guy is that he's just no good at what he does. But that's just my personal opinion. I'm not an attorney, so I can't say. All I can say is from a layman, just standing around looking at a case that's almost 2 years in, and there's been no depositions done. There's been
yeah,
no witnesses challenged. Um, do I have sour grapes because he hasn't worked with me and doesn't want to work with me? Maybe a little bit. I mean, I can't lie. I mean,
Well,
if
if it looks like a duck,
I,
then it is a duck,
well,
you know.
yeah, I mean, I've
right,
got,
Like a
and I
duck
right.
have
is a duck,
information,
you
and
know.
I have information that would be very useful, that could be very useful for them. Not everything that I know ends up in a documentary. There's many things that,
Sure.
that could be looked at into and all that. So, and again, I don't want to turn this into a rip on any particular person. I don't want to get sued for defamation or whatever, but honestly, it's the things I've seen just don't seem right to me. They don't, like I said, when it's a difference in opinion. And by the way, he already knows all of this. We had when I was testifying, they asked me about it. When Keefe D was set for a hearing and they went into the hearing, the other side, the prosecution, had actually opposed the um, motion that Mr. Arnold had filed. And it was a long opposition. It was like pages, like 34 pages of case sightings and all this kind of big motion. And on the day of the hearing for that motion, Carly Kearney, who is the judge in that case, asked Mr. Arnold. He came walking in with his trench coat and threw it over the bar and got his phone out, started looking through his phone. And Carly Kearney, the judge, said, "Well, Mr. Arnold, the prosecution has filed a rather lengthy opposition against your client, opposition to your motion, and it's not short, and they filed it just like 2 days ago." She says, "So what I'd like to ask you is if you would like to adjourn this hearing so you can file a written response back, which I will read," the judge said, "which I will read. You can file this written response back and I'll read it, and then we'll have a hearing later to talk about what your response is to their opposition." I don't know about the legal world, but in the rest of the world, that's called a free one.
Yeah.
Okay. Because the judge is saying to him, they filed a really lengthy opposition. Maybe you should take the time to sit down, digest all of it, understand what the arguments are, and then give me a response. Because you got to remember, the judge in Keefe D's homicide case was a public defender. Okay. Got to know that background. She came up through the public defender side of it. So she's given him every break in the world to win his case or to make his case.
Right.
And in this particular case, she said to Carl Arnold, she said, "Hey, you could argue it now, but they filed a really long opposition." In other words, I don't know, anybody could read and process all of it and try to get an argument together and just speak it out in court. I think you should go back and file a written response so you could check everything and make sure your case law is tight and all that fun stuff. And I'm giving you a free one that you can quit today. You don't have to say anything today. You can go back to your office. You can read through everything, make sure, check what they're saying, counter with that, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that at a later date. What do you say about that? Carl Arnold's response? Nah, it's fine. We'll just do it right now.
No.
That's what they call a free one. When the judge gives you a free one, take it.
Right.
When the judge gives you an opportunity, because she is telling you there's some booby trap in there, there's something in there, like I said, some booby trap or something that's in there that she's already read, and as a public defender says this is not good for the defense, they probably need to address this. And he takes out his phone and he kind of wipes through his phone and he's reading a little bit off his phone, then he reads a little bit more off his phone. It was horrible. His presentation, in my opinion, was a shit show. And yet he came in and he was just going to wing it instead of going back and doing the right thing procedurally. And again, it's a difference of opinion. It's his ship to row. He's the attorney. What do I know? I'm not an attorney. All I know is that if you sense that the judge has given you an opportunity to reconsider what's going on, maybe she's seen something that you don't. And that's a good time to go, you know what? You're right, Your Honor. Let's take a couple weeks. Let me go through this thing. Let me see what their response is. Let me see if there's any booby traps in here at all, any poison pills. Let's, good idea, Judge. You're giving me a free one. Thank you for that. Let's do that. No, we're going to wing it. So that was how he handled my testimony. That's how he handled the hearing on the motion to dismiss. That's how he's handled everything. So when it comes down to how they're going to handle this writ, I'd be shocked. I'd be shocked if they win this, because I think that the court's easiest move is just to say, yeah, you ran out of time. You're time barred from this. go and do that. So, I mean, I hope so. I hope it works. I hope it would be good. It'd be good for Keefe D if it did. But I have my doubts for all the reasons that we just talked about. So that's the writ. That's how that goes.
Well, it's interesting. The cards are definitely stacked against him. The state appointed, public defender. And at the end of the day, everything these guys got that they're prosecuting him with came from Reggie. Am I wrong? So I'm just
No.
saying, like, and Reggie was one of the lead witnesses as far as the indictment, the layers of conflict of interest. I know we get caught up in the layers of the dumb shit, if you will, of all of this stuff. Keefe getting assaulted and being refused bail and all of that. But at the end of the
Well,
day,
well,
I just don't see the Las Vegas that apparatus taking a huge L from this because they would have to admit like all this stuff Reggie gave us was
Well,
bullshit
let's talk
and.
about admitting stuff now. Of course, on YouTube, Junie has now admitted that he may be wrong about that Tupac was going to leave death row. Okay, his words I think were "I am defeated." Okay, which is humorous to me. One of our friends, Art Choke No Joke, runs at a YouTube channel. Very opinionated guy on a lot of stuff, but a good dude. Um, he was arguing back and forth with Reggie. They were going back and forth on their respective YouTube channels. And he made a couple of videos about everybody that was saying that Tupac was going to leave Death Row Records, that he made it clear. I mean, Michael Moore said it. He said it right in front of Suge Knight. He told
There's
him he was leaving Death
paperwork
Row Records.
existing,
Okay. Yeah.
right?
But Tracy Robinson said he was leaving Death Row Records.
Tracy, right?
There's
Yes.
a list of people. And yet it seems to be the only people saying that he wasn't leaving Death Row Records is Reggie Wright. So so he went on and kept finding video clips and kept finding things and Reggie put out a video. I think he said like Suge Knight fired David Kenner. He should have fired me too. It's like or something like Tupac fired David Kenner. Wish he'd fired me or something like that. But at any rate, he's finally coming around to where he realizes that when you really go after the evidence and you stack the evidence up against it, he is willing to admit that, yeah, I guess maybe Tupac was going to leave Death Row Records. And the funny thing about it is that he says, well, what does that matter? That doesn't matter. Well, of course it matters.
Of course.
Of course it
It's their
matters. It's
biggest money
motive.
machine, man.
My
Yeah.
God, if somebody said one of
That's
your
the kind of
biggest earners,
sociopathy I was talking about earlier.
yeah.
This guy's full on.
Right.
What does it matter? It matters because that whole sets a whole thing into motion when you tell the head of a record label and you're one of their biggest earners that you have no intention of continuing with them. That's like saying you're going to divorce your wife. Okay, those are very harsh words in a fight, and everybody goes, "Well, Tupac, Tupac would always say something, then he changed his mind 2 days later." True, true. That's pretty much been proven. But in this particular case, he had already made plans for euthanasia. And Choke brought up a great point. When Tupac was in Vegas the night he got killed, was he wearing a death row chain?
No, euthanasia. That's the one Gene Deal or Frank put back
He
together.
was he
Yeah,
was
he did.
wearing his own record label chain. He was not wearing the Death Row Records chain. Okay. When he said to everybody, I'm leaving Death Row Records, and that, Suge said that the reason that he wanted to talk to Tupac was, this is not what he told me, but this is what he said publicly before, was that they were going to work something out, that he wanted him in the car to work it out. But it means everything that Tupac was leaving Death Row Records, that he wanted out, that he was done. It means everything because it means that they were going to lose money. And that's it.
Can I ask you, RJ, do you know of any of the lore where it says, yes, he was going to create euthanasia, but it was going to be distributed through Death
No,
Row?
that came from Muta Beal, who was at the ripe old age of 17 at the time. Okay. So,
Okay.
you tell me how credible you're going to take 17-year-olds with what they knew at that time. And of course,
Right.
he wouldn't
I don't know
be
where I heard that, but I just
he
heard in
wouldn't
my
be in the
mind.
business side of it. He wouldn't be caught up in the business side of it because he said that Outlaws were
Copy
going to
that.
be on the euthanasia label, but he thought it was going to be distributed by Death Row Records. In my opinion, because Muta has changed his story several times, I think that he, at the time we interviewed him, and he said that he was scared of Death Row Records. He was still scared. Suge was still actually something in the play at that point, and so he was concerned. He did, there was things he didn't want to talk about at all. In fact,
Okay.
about the shooting or anything like that. He didn't want to talk about any of that. But we hooked him because we told him that he could ramble on about his religion for 20 minutes, and then we started once he warmed up. Then we started talking about some other stuff, and he kind of gave us some vague answers here and there. But he said he was the first one because that was 2008. That was the first time I think anybody ever even alluded to that it was going to anything was going to be distributed through Death Row because that wasn't how it worked. Death Row Records already was a label. Well, sub labels weren't really a thing. And if you were gonna, and Death Row's model was, if you were gonna not record for Death Row, you were gonna go over to what was the other label?
But the
Not
distribution stuff was Interscope. That's why I was like,
Yeah,
why
well,
would
that
you go
was
to Death
Interscope,
Row to
but
dist?
they went to Atlantic.
Right.
They went to Atlantic, or they went to a different record label and a different label altogether. If you were on the B side or the B team for Death Row, you got kicked down to the minors, and that was a whole nother record label. So there's been no corroboration of that. Euthanasia was a thing because again, I think Yasmin Fula had the euthanasia logo on the fax that went to David Kenner that said that he was done with David Kenner, that he couldn't represent him, and it would have been a conflict.
Yasmin Fula, give some context. Yafa
Yep.
Fula's mother.
Yep. The so I think that the notion that he was going to be part of the distributed death row, I don't. I haven't heard that. The latest thing, and I did this a big rant about this on my live stream, and I won't get into it too much here. But I am so damn sick and tired. Narnia, you can actually help me speak to this. I am so damn sick and tired of hearing all these people talk about all the things Tupac told them after he was shot or told him when he was in the hospital.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, no.
Tupac was shot in the fucking lung. The first thing they do when they put you in an ambulance and you say you can't breathe and you're spitting up blood, coughing up blood because blood is in your lungs because your lung is deflating, is they put a tube down your throat to keep the
Intubate your
lung
ass.
inflated, a vent or a valve on the bottom side of your lung to drain the blood out of it because you're pushing air into it and that will push the blood out the other side. And they give you a tranquilizer because they're putting a tube down your throat and they don't want you trying to pull it out or choke on it. So they give you a tranquilizer. I am sick to death of all of these ne'er-do-wells sitting there saying, "Oh, he told Suge that he loved him." That's the new
No,
one.
man.
That's that with the guy.
When they go down your throat like that,
Eric
man,
B. I think
it's
was the guy who said he's
expanded.
like, yeah,
You
he
can't
told
talk.
Suge that he loved him. That was his final words. I love you, Suge. And then Suge says, "Oh, we were talking about in the van. We were joking around like you got shot. Look at you, you got shot." And they're laughing and joking and carrying on in the ambulance on the way to the hospital.
That was always the first, not on the way to the hospital before they crashed out. Like that was before they crashed out that BMW on whatever it was. I heard, you're shot, you're shot. There was this banter going on, like who
Yeah, but
recorded
then he
this?
talks
Like who?
about in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, they're joking and carrying on. And then I think it was Reggie or somebody else said that Suge was banging some person in the back of the hospital. Okay, that he was that they caught it. They walked in on him banging some girl when they were in the hospital. And I'm like,
Unreal.
I worked for a hospital. I worked at one point. I worked for a hospital that's 10,000 employees, got 4 locations all over Southern California, big hospital. I'm very familiar with what they do when a high profile celebrity gets brought in a situation like that. It looks like Fort Apache, the Bronx. It is locked
Seriously.
down like a prison. All
Yeah.
the doors are automatically locked from the inside, so no one gets out. No matter who you are, at the hospital, you do not get out unless you go through the front entrance. That front entrance is locked. Security is standing around there, along with LVMPD cops who are there, because you got to remember at that time nobody knew F all about what was going on. They didn't
Mm.
know the Yasmin Fula tried to bring the fruit of Islam in there because they said that um um they were afraid somebody was going to come back and finish the job. And they had
Interesting.
Tupac at the hospital in a corner room with a lot of windows. And she was very concerned, and they wanted to move. They wanted them to move from that room.
Mm.
But my point is that the Vegas police, and you know this because of the when Kevin Hackey showed up like 2 days later or the next day, and all the static that they gave him, that it was complete pandemonium at that hospital. Okay, where the police, Vegas police, didn't know if the guy was going to come back. They didn't know who shot him. They don't know who's the good guy. They don't know who's the bad guy. They got 100 gang guys standing around, all wanting to know what's going on. They're not
Did
getting
you
in
mention
that
Kevin
hospital.
Hackey? I'm sorry. Did you say Kevin Hackey?
Yes, Kevin Hackey. Yeah. When Kevin
Okay.
Hackey tried to get in there, Kevin Hackey introduced himself as death row security and then told him that he was with the FBI. Okay.
And as a part of your documentaries, he wasn't there because correct me if I'm wrong, had flown out and was flying back in to do support, or maybe he flew in after the report of the shooting, but he was supposed to be support for right wing security.
Yeah, but he unfortunately had arrested a guy. He had arrested a guy and had to be at the hospital with that guy. Um, and from suffering I think they beat him up and he had to stay at the hospital and make sure nobody was going to press charges. But I can't verify that. It just
But
it
I
was
think that's
funny
important
the
to
way that he
again,
put it.
RJ, don't over minimize. Like you give context to this. Like that was the other support staff for right wing security. He was supposed
Right.
to be there
Hmm.
with the
So
radio as well.
yeah, but he showed up. He showed up, and the hospital staff and the police that were there, none of them wanted him around. He was security and everything. Good thing. No, leave. If you notice and you watch the videos of that were taken by the news crews of what at the hospital there while Tupac's in intensive care, while he's after he's been shot the next day, where is everybody? In the parking lot.
That's right. I was about to say outside.
They're
There's video
outside.
of that. Yeah.
When they did the news conferences with the doctor, they brought the podium outside for the press, the media. When somebody is shot, a high profile celebrity is shot too, arguably, and they're in intensive care, and one of them is on life support, and they don't know who did it, and they half the guys that were standing around there could have been guys that one guy could have just walked up to him and shot him. You never know. And being a mob town like Vegas is, and you got to have that perspective. Okay.
Damn.
Mm.
They're going to keep everybody the hell away from that hospital. No
You
one.
just never know.
So all of this bullshit talk about all these guys saying that they were hanging out in the lobby and that they were talking and they were talking to nurses and the nurses said this and the doctors said this. First off, the second thing was there was $1 million bounty out for pictures of Tupac in the hospital, and everybody knew it. The Inquirer had put out like $1 million for a picture of Tupac in the hospital.
The Inquirer, you said?
Yeah, the Inquirer, the National Enquirer. And the police knew that. So if you don't know who's who, you don't know who shot him, you don't have a clue what the dynamic is of what's going on here. You just got a thousand rap guys or friends or fans or whatever it is all hanging out and feeling like they got to be there at the hospital. Meanwhile, you're fighting for this guy's life over here. You think for a minute that they're going to let anybody in that hospital? Hell
When there's
no.
also the layer of the conversation that supposedly Reggie had with Suge in the hospital, came in like whatever the conversation was. There supposedly was a
Well, I
conversation
would
that
actually,
took
the
place.
truth of the matter is that Yasmin Fula didn't trust death row security. I would challenge, because what else has he lied about? Oh, I don't know.
Right.
But,
Yeah.
But you heard about that, right?
Reggie
When he
always
said he
tells
came in and
Reggie
talked
always
to
tells the
Suge.
truth. So, we should take this for gospel that even as the head of the record label, the head of security for the record label, maybe there's, I would say, and it's decreasing. Right now, it's a 2 in 10 probability that he was actually even allowed in the hospital. Because here's the thing. If you're the head of security for the record label and your biggest artist just got shot, what do you think the appetite is for anybody letting you near him? Okay.
Epic failure.
I
Epic
mean, think about that.
failure.
And think about that. Yeah, I'm the head of security for the company that just screwed up major. The police still don't know that Reggie Wright is a good guy. They don't know. And Arnie, what happens with cops? What do cops do when they don't know what's going on?
Well, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to want to talk to him first, take him offside, take him off site, you
Yep.
know, and then and find out, like you just said, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? What's going on? Who are you? Where, what's your background?
What is the operational procedure in a situation like that? Am I wrong? They lock it down.
Oh, they lock it down, man. Ain't nobody getting in, and you said it perfectly, man. You're gonna have one way in and one way out. Everything else is secure, until you get the approval from in-house security at the police, at the hospital, or LV, Las Vegas Metro PD.
Yeah, that's
That
right.
they've got what they wanted, and everything's good.
So
Uh,
I would say I would say that the say first off, get rid of the whole thing about they talk to the doctors and the nurses. The doctors and nurses aren't going to say shit.
No, and they
Much
secured it
more.
down because there are no photos floating around of him in the hospital. There are no photos of Suge Knight, in the hospital.
No, he's outside walking around
He's
too.
outside walking around. He went in
Yeah,
there for a quick, problem. Hey, okay, I'm good. I'm sewn up. Just
yeah.
put some tape on it, and they escorted him out.
He's gone.
He's
Yahoo
gone,
Fula. Yeah,
and
Yahoo.
nothing else. He
Yeah.
wasn't even allowed to go back
No,
in.
Yahoo Fula is one of the
If I may ask,
closest
gentlemen,
people
if I
to
may ask,
Pac.
please, is there, and he's said this is a thing, is there a slug or any type of round in Suge Knight's head?
I believe there could be.
Okay.
I believe there could be.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I didn't
I have no
believe it.
medical evidence. I was just curious.
Yeah, I was skeptical about it until Junior and I actually were sitting next to a guy at the airport. We happened to be talking about how ridiculous it would be that Suge Knight would have a bullet in his head. And the guy sitting next to us goes, "Here, let me show you something." And actually showed us and made us feel the top of his head
Oh,
where
I
there was
heard
a
that. Yeah,
bullet
yeah, yeah.
in his
Yeah.
head. And he goes, don't think that that's not possible because I'm living proof it is. I'm like, well, God put you there for a reason, dude. So because there's no way, how random is that we'd be talking about that, and the guy sitting next to us would be
Same
happen to have
round,
a fucking
same
bullet
type
in
of
his head,
round. Not a
you know?
22, maybe a
Yeah.
22, but
Yeah.
same
But
same gauge.
my point, and again, if the gun that was used was a 40 caliber, and Suge keeps insisting that he had a 45 in his head,
Mm.
well, that opens
Mm.
up a whole different explanation or a whole different
Oh,
line of
snaps.
That's a
thought
big hole.
regarding,
The old second shooter.
yes, that there may be some traction there to it. One of the things that
Interesting.
we're doing, and maybe we'll wrap it up by talking a little bit future. One of the things I've got going is, do you guys like the special effects and cover up? Did you like the
I
intersection
did.
stuff with
Yeah,
the cars
it
and all
was.
that? Yeah, the special effects team that did that for me, and they work on Marvel stuff. They do all kinds of crazy stuff. When we did that, we built in what they call virtual space. We built that entire intersection all the way down to the street light, all the way down to the billboard, all the way down to if there was a gas station, how many pumps did it have? In 3D, we reconstructed that entire thing, parking structure and all that. And so that's literally, none of that's painted. Those are all geographic models. The cars, we got car models of the exact make and model and year of the car. So everything was photo identifiable.
Nice.
They did a great job with it. I mean, with the thing coming up to the car and all that. Well, the beautiful thing about a setup like that is once they built it, it's built. And they gave me what's called a virtual camera that I could actually take this camera because the 3D is all built. Everything's built. We got the animation of the cars, where they stop, where they go, where they turn, all that stuff. And we run the same animation over and over again. And I can take a camera and I can build any angle I want to build or any shot that I want to do where I want to roll it down across the concrete as this car's coming up. I can do that literally. I can do it anywhere I want to. I can put the camera literally anywhere I want. And so I did 6 or 7 shots of this kind of thing. In season 2, they're already working on it. We're going to try to dispel the myth of what Suge Knight saw or what he didn't see. Because we're going to put that virtual camera right in his driver's seat. We're going to put it right there to see exactly what he saw. The same thing, we're going to do the same thing and put the camera in Frank Alexander's driver's seat so that we can see maybe if there was a second shooter, not saying there was, but if there was a second shooter, that maybe Frank didn't see him because the BMW, the tint of the BMW's back window, and seeing through that past the 2 guys sitting in the car, past the front windshield, maybe Frank couldn't see if there was a second shooter or not.
Do
Maybe
we
he didn't
know
have
from
it.
the ballistics on the BMW, were there any indications of a possible second trajectory, or was it just one? You know, because that's how that stuff rolls. You know,
There are several explainable gunshots, and there are a few that are not explainable, including gunshots that somehow either ricocheted or they did something to put them in the parking structure and hitting a van in the parking structure. Okay,
what?
that would be a ricochet. If you There's obviously a big gunshot through the front windshield that a lot of people have said, well, maybe they got one last glance off going backwards and shot backwards and clipped it through the windshield. We don't know. There's a big hole in the windshield. We don't know. Okay. So
Interesting.
we're back to the circumstantial thing again. Could there have
No,
been?
that's. I mean,
But
that's physical. That's ballistic. What?
Well,
That's not.
right. But at the same time, again, we go back with the Cadillac. What did Frank see? What did the eyewitnesses saw? The police that were in the parking structure, 3 stories up, looking down on the intersection, they saw something that doesn't really compare well with what everybody else said happened. They claimed that there was a guy that was walking in front of the BMW. That's their claim. They claim that. We always thought, well, that was Frank Alexander going around to see if they were okay. But all Frank did was go to the driver's side door. He never went in front of the car, never ran around to Suge, because he said the minute he tried that driver door, they took
They
off.
drove off.
Okay, they took off. So when you have that kind of setup where these guys looking down, you can't discount what they say. You can try to rationalize what they're saying happened, but you've got two unaccountable things. You've got the fact that somehow a gunshot ricocheted into a 3-story parking structure 100 yards away from the shooting, and the Cadillac is only shooting down. They're shooting down into the door. They're shooting forward into the door. They're not shooting up high. They're not shooting, 3 stories up.
This is nothing potential from quote unquote homeboy security as far as trajectory. I mean,
Are you talking about if there was anybody shooting back?
yeah.
Well, there's no evidence. No, there's no evidence that anybody shot back.
Right.
There's no evidence that anybody shot back. And in fact, they talk about a hole in Buntry's car. It was in the tail. So you're telling me, what did the bullet do? A U-turn and go into the back of his car?
It's not funny.
Okay, yeah. So there's a lot of questions that are unanswered, and being.
See, I didn't know about this extra ballistic stuff. I thought there was
Well, listen, this is all part of being a good investigator. You can't make the picture fit the frame. You have to take all the evidence as
No,
it
I
comes
get
and
it.
Say,
But when I
sort
heard
through
about
it.
this like possible second shooter, I was like, get the fuck out of here. I mean, because
Well,
I
I
had
did
no
too.
frame of.
I did too. I did too. But then again, who's the better detective? The one that says absolutely not and discounts it and throws it out?
Again, I eliminate any hearsay. I'm looking at, is there any physical ballistic evidence to show a
Well,
trajectory of a gun other than the one that supposedly Orlando shot?
and we will not know that, but we have to account for what we do know. And what we do know is there was holes in the windshield, the front windshield. Okay.
Shut
Number one.
up.
And number two, there were stray bullets that ended up in the parking structure of a building 3 stories up 100 yards away that shot a van. Okay. Yet Barbara, forget Barbara Harris, I think was her name. She was the one driving the pickup truck that was in front of the girls in the Sebring, and she said that the Cadillac toward shot past her. The other car shot past her, but there were no gunshots. Nobody was shooting. So we have eyewitness statements that detail that there wasn't this, shootout on OK Corral, but these two cars chasing each other, like Orlando Anderson would turn around shooting back at the death row guys. That's all hood lore. But we have to account for that. And again, and I'm not sitting here telling you that the second shooter thing has any traction on it at all. But it's what's interesting about it, and maybe we'll leave this episode with this tingle bit here.
Yeah.
Think about it for a minute. Let's say you're Suge Knight, and let's say, for example, you may have been in on all of it, and the only excuse that anybody ever uses is that, well, Suge Knight was in the car, so he had nothing to do with it. Okay? Suge Knight was definitely a victim. Now, whether the two truths can be the same. he can be the victim. He could have been in on it too, because nobody's ruled that out. But if he was, what if, what if two facts were the same? What if Suge thought everything was just peachy keen and he had it all set that they were shooting in the door on the one side and the Tupac was there and there was very little chance that he was going to get hit? But now we learn from Phil Carson and we learn from others that there were people that were wanting to take over Death Row Records and wanting to get Suge out of the way.
Two things can be true at the same time. See, that's
Double
fascinating.
cross.
I've always
Double
wondered that. Like,
cross.
But that's the wrong narrative, man.
No.
What's that?
That's double cross. That perhaps the only that second shooter, who is, by the way, the one that they think might have been the guy, he's flat out lied about everything and like said that he said things he didn't see and all this kind of stuff. So when you're talking about a narrative and you say, well, Suge Knight was a victim, we know that he was. Tupac was a victim. Suge Knight was a victim. Somebody shot at them. They didn't shoot themselves. But when you look at what happened with the Cadillac was on the one side of it, but what you didn't see coming is that one in the chamber. You got that guy coming from the front. If Frank didn't see it, and that's what we're challenging. If Frank didn't see it because he couldn't see through the BMW because of the tinted windows, and Suge's a big dude, you can't see past him fucking anyway in that car. If he can't see it and all he saw was the hand come out of the Cadillac and start shooting and everybody ducked, that doesn't necessarily discount the fact that there may not have been somebody else there.
Arnie, can I ask you something? And I've heard this in the lore of like testimony. First person testimony is oftentimes the most unreliable, which seems to me very counterintuitive because like if you're right there watching it, sometimes as far as not necessarily inadmissibility, but like reliability is like, man, were you not just freaked out from what you were just seeing in that second? How reliable is people's firsthand testimonies that relates just like something popping off so immediately?
I think it's to my, from interviewing a lot of victims and a lot of witnesses, it's very high that they're correct. It's when they settle down and they start speaking to others and seeing their surroundings, then they get a little more what do you call it, falsehoods,
selective with their memory of
selective. Yeah. And then they just, but if you're trained in that, you can keep it running in your, like, I can tell you the one time I got into a deadly officer involved shooting, and it runs through my head I could tell you minute by second everything that's going on. So yeah, you got to get that witness right then and there, and the victim, and interview them right away and get their, because they're going to be spot on. It's when they are getting colluded by other friends, other victims, or talk to other witnesses. That's why when we used to have a witness, witnesses, we'd separate them because we didn't want them talking to each other.
Yes.
Right.
We had
You don't want 14 jurors in the same hallway?
Ah!
He circles back. Genius.
Yeah. Genius. That's a good one.
You don't want that. People talk. And I think that I've had some questions about the shooting. I mean, I've had some questions about whether or not Suge saw Keefe D in the car. Keefe D said in his book, "Oh, we locked eyes like lions locking eyes before the big fight," or some bullshit like that, right? That anybody that knows Keefe D knows he couldn't string that sentence together if his life depended on it. You could hold a gun. You could hold a gun to Keefe D's head. He could never come up with that. Okay, seriously. It's like AI Keefe D. But nevertheless, he's been quoted like that.
You're killing me.
So, the question becomes whether or not Suge Knight thought Orlando Anderson had anything to do with it or not. So what do? Guess what? I talked to Suge Knight about it.
Oh, what?
We talked. And we talked and we talked and we talked for a great period of weeks about these things.
Wow.
Shut
Yeah.
up.
And so when we get together next week, we're going to
You
talk
better have said something about Sharitha and Kevin Gaines getting their game on.
Uh-oh.
well,
And how the potential
I
Reggie
think
Wright intervention to
Uh-oh.
take over death row. I mean,
I
it's
will tell
got to
you-
be a part of it.
I will tell you that the word pork butt was thrown around many times. at
Once
that
or
meeting
twice.
occasion. So
Once or twice.
yeah. So
It's a long
we'll
time
we'll
since I
talk
heard
about that
name,
and kind of what
Kevin
my
Gaines.
yeah, it's
Wow.
kind of what my takeaway was from the conversations overall, because it wasn't what you'd think. It was a lot different than what you think, but nevertheless, it's important, and we'll tell you all about it
That's the
when you
cliffhanger right there.
tune
The
in for the
teaser.
next episode. Yes, when you tune
teaser.
back in for the podcast. But for now, on behalf of myself and Arnie, Jeff, and every knucklehead that tunes in, thank you for doing so.
Yes.
We're going to get the hell out of Dodge, I think, now. So say
got it,
goodbye,
brother.
guys.
Hasta luego. Ciao.
Peace.
Bye.